You know the moment. You try something new, a skill, a habit, a challenge, and it doesn't go well. You mess up, you struggle, you feel behind, and without even realizing it, a sentence forms in your head. I'm just not good at this. I'll never be able to figure this out. I'm not cut out for this. But what if just one word could change that story completely? Yet. It's a tiny word, just 3 letters, but it carries a powerful message. It signals that the journey isn't over, that what you can't do today is simply what you haven't mastered yet. It invites possibility where there used to be permanence, and it's one of the most underrated tools for growth, grit, and long-term success. Think about the difference. I can't do this feels like a wall, a dead end, a judgment. But I can't do this yet? That's a window, a breath of air, a permission slip to keep going. It's the difference between quitting and continuing, between shame and strategy. Because the word yet shifts your mindset from fixed to flexible. It transforms failure into feedback, and it teaches your brain that struggle isn't a stop sign, it's part of the process. Most people grow up believing that ability is static, that you're either good at something or you're not. That intelligence, talent, or confidence are things you either have or don't. But research and experience show us something much more empowering. The brain is adaptable. Skills are learnable. Confidence is buildable. But only if you stay in the game. Only if you're willing to get it wrong enough times to finally get it right. That's what yet protects. Your willingness to stay in the process. Because without it, every mistake feels personal. Every setback feels like proof you're not enough. But with yet, those same moments become fuel. They become steps. They become evidence that growth is happening, not despite the struggle, but because of it. And that's why this little word shows up in some of the most powerful personal transformations. The person who failed the test but said, I don't understand this yet, and kept studying. The athlete who missed the shot but said, I don't have the technique down yet, and went back to practice. The entrepreneur whose first idea flopped but said, I haven't figured out what works yet, and kept creating. They didn't let a moment define them. They let it refine them. And that mindset, the yet mindset, is the bridge between where you are and where you could be. Not because everything becomes easy, but because you stop expecting it to be. You stop needing instant success to feel worthy of the effort. And that's when real progress starts to build. The truth is, anything worth doing well is going to be hard at first. That's not a sign to stop. That's a sign you're right on schedule. You're learning, you're stretching, you're growing new capacity. And just like muscles need resistance to grow, your mind needs challenge to expand. Yet keeps you from mistaking difficulty for defeat. It reminds you that progress isn't linear, that growth happens in waves, that failure isn't the opposite of success, it's part of it. And once you start thinking that way, your whole relationship with effort changes. You stop fearing mistakes. You start learning from them. You stop chasing perfection. You start building resilience. You start trusting yourself in the long haul, not just the highlight reel. Because when you view yourself through the lens of yet, you no longer feel stuck inside today's limitations. Instead, you recognize that today is just a snapshot, not the whole story. You stop saying, I'm bad at this, and start saying, I'm still learning this. You stop saying, this is too hard, and start asking, what's my next small step? That shift might seem subtle, but it completely transforms how you show up. You stop approaching goals like tests of identity and start treating them like skills to develop. You start seeing failure as data instead of judgment. You stop thinking, I'm not good enough, and begin asking, what would it take to improve? That curiosity is powerful. It opens up your brain. It increases motivation. It even affects your nervous system, lowering threat responses and making learning smoother. Because biologically, when you feel like a failure, your brain moves into survival mode. You shut down, you avoid, you disconnect. But when you see yourself as a work in progress, your brain relaxes. You feel safe to try again. You become more flexible, more adaptive, more strategic. And most importantly, you stay in motion. That's the magic of yet. It gives you permission to keep going when everything in you wants to quit. It creates a pause between challenge and conclusion, a space where you can choose a new story. And the more you practice that pause, the stronger it gets. It becomes automatic. It becomes your reflex. Imagine someone who's just starting to learn how to play the piano. They hit wrong notes, stumble through scales, maybe even feel embarrassed. But if they believe they're simply not musical, they'll give up. If they believe they can't do it yet, they'll keep playing. They'll build muscle memory. They'll get better. They'll prove their belief right. And that's a truth worth repeating. We tend to live into the stories we tell ourselves. If you tell yourself you're someone who always quits, you'll look for reasons to stop. But if you tell yourself you're someone who's growing, someone who's learning, someone who's figuring it out, you'll look for reasons to continue. And over time, that difference compounds. The compounding effect of yet is enormous, because growth isn't one big leap. It's a million tiny moments of choosing again, of trying again, of showing up when you don't feel ready. And those moments add up. They shape your identity. They shift your trajectory. They change your life, slowly but profoundly. It's not magic, it's mindset. And once you start looking for your yets, you begin finding them everywhere. Every weakness becomes a classroom. Every delay becomes a training ground. Every mistake becomes part of your refinement. And that perspective, that powerful, hopeful, grounded perspective, becomes your competitive advantage in anything you pursue. And once that perspective becomes part of your operating system, you begin to experience something even deeper than progress. You begin to experience peace. Not the kind that comes from everything going right, but the kind that comes from trusting yourself even when things go wrong. The kind of peace that says, I can figure this out eventually, instead of I need to be perfect right now. You stop tying your worth to outcomes. You stop measuring your value by how fast you achieve something. You begin measuring by how consistently you return. That return becomes your rhythm, your recalibration point. It's how you navigate the storms of doubt and distraction. And it builds a quiet confidence that no one can take from you. This confidence isn't loud or flashy. It's not based on proving anything. It's based on knowing that your effort matters, that your progress is real, even when it's invisible, that who you're becoming is more important than how quickly you're getting there. And that's where the true power of yet reveals itself. It doesn't just change how you think, it changes how you feel about the process. You begin to welcome struggle instead of fearing it. You begin to notice your reactions, pause and choose something better. You begin to rewrite stories that have been on autopilot for years, stories that told you to give up, hide or shrink. Those old stories lose their grip when yet is present, because yet creates a new possibility every time you're tempted to stop. It gives you just enough space to breathe, just enough room to remember, just enough hope to try again. And trying again is where growth lives. The people who build great things, relationships, careers, health, creativity, confidence, are not the ones who got it all right on the first try. They're the ones who tried again, and again, and again. Not because they were certain of success, but because they had made peace with the process. They trusted that not yet didn't mean never. It just meant keep going. And when you internalize that, your entire framework for effort transforms. You stop looking for quick results. You stop obsessing over perfection. You start looking for consistency. You start asking, how can I make this sustainable? You build habits that are small enough to stick, but meaningful enough to shift your identity. This is what mindset mastery looks like in real time. Not a perfect streak, but a pattern of returning. Not a flawless record, but a deepened relationship with your own process. And that relationship is what builds long-term self-trust. Because if you can trust yourself to keep going, there's almost nothing you can't learn. Nothing you can't get better at. Nothing you can't eventually figure out. Yet reminds you of that, gently but powerfully, every time the path feels steep, every time you hear the voice of doubt whispering that you're not good enough. You don't have to argue with that voice. You don't have to prove anything. You just say, not yet, and you keep moving. And as you keep moving, something subtle begins to shift. Your brain starts to rewire. What once felt impossible starts to feel familiar. What once triggered fear now invites curiosity. You begin to associate challenge with opportunity instead of danger. This isn't just mindset fluff, it's neuroscience. Your brain literally adapts based on the signals you send it. And every time you say yet, you're signaling growth, not defeat. You're telling your brain, we're not done here. And that keeps your learning centers activated. It keeps your motivation alive. It makes failure feel temporary, like a stop along the way, not the end of the road. And when you live like that, you become dangerous in the best way. Because people who don't give up are hard to stop. People who stay in the game eventually outlast the ones who only play when it's easy. People who trust the process, even when it's slow, even when it's hard, eventually master things that others quit before they even started. And it's not because they're smarter or more talented. It's because they kept showing up. They believed in the compound effect of consistent effort. They stopped looking for shortcuts and started building capacity. That's the real flex. Not natural talent, but cultivated resilience. The kind that gets up after a fall. The kind that adjusts instead of abandons. The kind that remembers why it started, even when it's tempting to stop. That kind of resilience becomes your superpower. Because it doesn't depend on motivation, which is fleeting. It doesn't depend on perfect conditions, which rarely show up. It depends on your relationship with the long game. Your belief that if you keep stacking small wins, they'll add up to something big. And yet is what keeps that belief alive. It's the word that closes the gap between effort and identity. Because the more you keep showing up, even when you feel behind, the more you start to see yourself as someone who grows. And once that identity locks in, it changes how you act. You make different decisions. You take smarter risks. You stop waiting to feel ready, and you start moving with what you have. That's the difference between people who dabble and people who evolve. Dabblers chase novelty. Evolvers chase depth. Dabblers need things to be exciting. Evolvers need things to be meaningful. And once you understand that the growth is in the depth, in sticking with something long enough to get good at it, everything starts to shift. You stop jumping from thing to thing, chasing the next shiny goal. You start committing. You start digging in. You start seeing your practice, whatever it is, as sacred ground. A place where you meet yourself every day and say, I may not be there yet, but I'm closer than I was. And I'm not going anywhere. That kind of steady energy is rare, and people notice it. Not because you're flashy, but because you're consistent. Not because you're loud, but because you're present. You become a quiet force, grounded, intentional, and unshakable in your growth. And the more consistent you become, the less you rely on external validation. You don't need the applause. You don't need the quick results. You don't need everyone to see your progress for it to be real, because you've built something stronger, internal validation. A sense of grounded confidence that says, I know I'm getting better, even if no one else notices yet. That word again, yet. It becomes your anchor in the face of impatience. Because let's be honest, we all want results now. We want proof that the effort is paying off. But growth doesn't always come with a timestamp. It doesn't send you an email confirming its arrival. Sometimes it's quiet, invisible. It works under the surface, reshaping how you think, how you respond, how you believe in yourself. And then one day, it shows itself. You react differently. You bounce back faster. You take a risk you never would have before. You speak up. You follow through. You surprise yourself. And that's when it hits you. The work was working the whole time. Even when it didn't feel like it. Even when you doubted it. Even when you almost gave up. That's what yet protected. It kept you in the room long enough for transformation to catch up. It kept you steady while your skills matured. It kept your hope alive when your ego was bruised. And over time, that quiet persistence becomes your trademark. People start asking you how you stay so focused, how you keep improving, how you don't let setbacks knock you off course. And you smile because you know the truth. You didn't always feel focused. You didn't always feel strong. You just learned to talk to yourself differently. You learned to say, I'm not there yet, instead of I'm not good enough. You gave yourself space to grow instead of reasons to quit. And that shift, that language shift, changed everything. Because the words you use shape your emotional experience. They shape your motivation. They shape your identity. And when you get intentional about your language, you get intentional about your life. You stop reinforcing limits. You start reinforcing growth. You stop closing doors. You start leaving them cracked open, just enough for possibility to walk through. That's what yet does. It cracks the door. It says, don't lock this chapter yet. You're still in it. There's more to come. And that mindset leaks into every area of your life, not just your work or your goals, but your relationships, your communication, your self-talk. You stop expecting perfection from others because you've stopped demanding it from yourself. You make room for the messiness of growth in you and in everyone around you. And that's where compassion grows, in the space between where you are and where you could be, where they are and where they could be. Yet teaches patience, not passivity but powerful patience, the kind that fuels action, not delay, the kind that helps you show up today, even if you won't see results until tomorrow. That's real maturity, that's real grit, that's what creates lasting change. Because lasting change isn't built in bursts, it's built in repetitions. Quiet, ordinary, often unseen repetitions. The kind that don't look impressive to the outside world, but shape who you become. The kind of effort that's easy to skip, because no one's watching, and the results aren't immediate. But you show up anyway. You try again, you take one more step. That's the power of yet. It keeps you tethered to the process when your brain wants to escape. It reminds you that you don't need to be finished to be making progress. That just showing up, even imperfectly, counts. That inching forward is still moving forward. And over time, those inches add up. You begin to see yourself differently, not as someone who occasionally succeeds, but as someone who consistently evolves. That identity shift from doer to grower changes the rules of the game. You stop aiming for short-term wins. You start building long-term wisdom. You stop asking, did I win today? And start asking, what did I learn today? That one question rewires your brain, because when you look for learning, you always find it, even in failure, especially in failure. And that makes you fearless in the best way, not reckless, but resilient. You don't need to avoid discomfort anymore, because you've trained yourself to find meaning inside it. And that's a life-changing skill, because discomfort is inevitable. Uncertainty is part of the deal. You will mess up, you will fall short, you will face moments that make you question yourself. But if your default response becomes, okay, what's the next step, instead of, I guess I'm not good at this, then you've already won half the battle. And the other half? That's just persistence. Because the people who succeed in any domain, from health to art to business to relationships, aren't the ones who never fail. They're the ones who don't stop. They're the ones who get better at bouncing back, who recover faster, who adapt more creatively. And all of that comes from a mindset that doesn't treat setbacks as verdicts, but as pivots. That's what Yet invites, the pivot, the regroup, the shift. And in those moments of shift, you become more strategic. You reflect, you tweak, you learn to let go of what isn't working without letting go of your goal. You become agile, not fragile. And that agility makes you dangerous in a world full of quitters. Not because you're better, but because you're still here, still trying, still growing, still saying not yet instead of never. That mindset turns resistance into training, repetition into refinement, struggle into story. It doesn't make things easy, but it makes them worth it, because you begin to see the bigger picture. You're not just building a skill or chasing a goal. You're becoming the kind of person who doesn't stop growing. And that changes everything. It changes how you plan. You stop aiming for perfect conditions and start designing systems that work even when motivation is low. You create habits that are flexible, not fragile. You build routines that don't collapse the moment life gets messy. Because you've accepted that growth isn't about feeling ready, it's about being willing. Willing to try, willing to adjust, willing to stay. And in that willingness, you start stacking quiet wins. The kind of wins that don't get celebrated on social media, but shape your life behind the scenes. You go to bed a little earlier. You journal after a hard day instead of spiraling. You take the walk. You ask the question. You show up to practice. You speak up in the meeting. You do the uncomfortable thing, not because it guarantees success, but because it guarantees progress. And that shift from results to progress makes everything feel lighter. You no longer carry the pressure to be perfect today. You just carry the responsibility to be a little better than yesterday. And that's a weight you can lift. That's a pace you can sustain. That's a lifestyle you can live with and thrive in. Because the truth is, High achievers burn out not from trying hard, but from trying to be perfect all the time. From feeling like every move has to be flawless, every outcome has to be impressive. But when you let yet lead, you remove the shame from the learning curve, you remove the ego from the effort. You start operating from a place of growth, not fear. And that's when you unlock flow. Not the flow that feels mystical or accidental, but the real day in, day out rhythm of showing up and getting better. You become process-driven, curious, calm. You start measuring your life not by how many things you've achieved, but by how many times you've returned. Returned to the workout. Returned to the writing. Returned to the hard conversation. Returned to the uncomfortable truth. You become the kind of person who always returns, who never counts themselves out too early, who never labels a chapter before it's finished. That's the kind of person people admire, not because you're always right, but because you're always growing. And that influence ripples outward. Your mindset starts to inspire others, not because you're preaching to them, but because they can feel your resilience. They notice how you respond when things go sideways. They see how you bounce back from setbacks. They watch how you treat yourself when you're learning something new. And without even trying, you give them permission to do the same. You model what it means to be human and in progress. And that's one of the most powerful gifts you can offer. Because the world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs more people willing to get better, people willing to start again, people willing to say, I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it. And when that becomes your default language, your life opens up. Opportunities expand, confidence grows, and the pressure to prove gets replaced by the freedom to improve. And that freedom, the freedom to improve without judgment, becomes your creative fuel. You start taking more risks, not reckless ones, but meaningful ones. You submit the application, share the idea, make the ask, launch the project. Not because you're certain of success, but because you no longer see failure as a threat to your identity. You've decoupled who you are from how well you perform in any given moment. That's liberation. Because once you stop tying your self-worth to your results, you gain the ability to experiment, to play, to stretch. And in that freedom, innovation happens. Growth accelerates. Confidence compounds. Because confidence doesn't come from being right. It comes from being resilient. From knowing that even if you get it wrong, you'll recover, you'll learn, you'll evolve. That kind of confidence makes you magnetic to opportunities, to collaborators, to growth itself. Because growth loves a willing partner. Not a perfect one, a willing one. And you become that partner every time you say yet. Every time you catch yourself in a fixed mindset. I can't do this, I'm not good at that, this just isn't for me. And you add that tiny word, yet. You take back your power. You disrupt the script. You rewrite the narrative in real time. That's not wishful thinking. That's cognitive behavioral rewiring. It's using language to shift perspective, and perspective to shift action. And action, repeated over time, becomes transformation. That's what this is about. Not motivation hacks, not feel-good slogans, but actual lived transformation. The kind that's earned through small daily decisions, through the choice to keep going, through the practice of speaking to yourself like someone you believe in, even when you haven't seen the results yet. Because you understand something now. Belief isn't a reward, it's a responsibility. You don't wait until you're good enough to believe in yourself. You believe in yourself so you can become good enough. That's the paradox. That's the path. And yet is your compass. It keeps you aligned when distractions try to steal your focus. It keeps you centered when insecurity tries to cloud your judgment. It keeps you moving when fear tries to paralyze you. It keeps you curious when cynicism tries to shut you down. It's one word, but it holds the weight of every step you've taken, every challenge you've faced, every goal you haven't reached yet. And that yet is what lets you keep walking forward with purpose, with patience, with power, even when the road bends, even when the path disappears, even when you feel like starting over, because you know you're not starting from scratch, you're starting from experience. And that experience, paired with the right mindset, is unstoppable. Unstoppable, not because you'll never struggle again, but because you'll no longer be defined by those struggles. You'll see them as part of your curriculum. Lessons embedded in the journey, not detours but directions. Not setbacks but setups for deeper understanding. And that reframing will quietly shift the way you carry yourself. You'll walk into new challenges with a different energy. Not arrogance, but assurance. The kind of assurance that comes from knowing you've faced hard things before and kept going. From knowing that your value doesn't vanish in moments of failure. From knowing that you're allowed to learn in public and that growing in front of others is not a weakness, it's a strength. That's when life gets exciting. Because when you stop hiding your process, people start seeing your progress. When you stop pretending to have it all figured out, people start relating to you. And when you embrace the journey, all of it, you become a more trustworthy voice, a more grounded leader, a more magnetic presence. Because people can feel when someone is real. They can feel when someone has earned their confidence through effort. When someone has gone through the awkward middle, the clumsy start, the early failures, and decided not to quit. That's who we're drawn to. Not the person who never struggled, but the one who struggled honestly and came out stronger. And that's what yet makes possible. It keeps you in the game long enough to gain perspective. It softens your harsh self-judgment. It gives you room to breathe, to make mistakes without making them mean something about your worth. That's the oxygen growth needs. Safety. And when you create that safety internally, your potential expands. You start choosing stretch over stagnation. You start seeking feedback instead of avoiding it. You start chasing improvement instead of perfection. And your world opens up, not because the circumstances changed, but because your interpretation did. That's how powerful one word can be. It's not magic, it's not a gimmick. It's a shift in how you see effort, a shift in how you define progress, a shift in how you treat yourself when you're not there yet, wherever there is. And it's a shift that compounds. Because the more you say yet, the more you believe it. The more you believe it, the more you act on it. The more you act on it, the more you change. And eventually that thing you once couldn't do, you can do it. Not because you hacked the system, but because you stayed long enough to learn it, long enough to own it, long enough to become the kind of person who could handle it. That's the slow magic of persistence, the compound interest of belief. The transformation that doesn't happen all at once, but does happen, piece by piece, breath by breath, step by step. And every one of those steps is powered by yet. And what's wild is, once you internalize that, you begin to look at others differently too. You stop judging people based on where they are and start wondering where they could be, with time, support, and belief. You start seeing their yet just as clearly as your own. And that changes how you lead, how you teach, how you parent, how you relate. Because now you know that growth isn't just possible, it's predictable when the right conditions are in place. And one of those conditions is grace. The grace to not be great right away. The grace to be in process. The grace to wobble, fall, regroup, and try again without shame. That's what makes great mentors, great coaches, great friends. People who hold space for your yet instead of rushing your arrival. People who believe in your potential before your results. And the best part, once you become that person for yourself, you start becoming it for others without even trying. Your mindset sets the tone for every space you enter. When you walk in grounded, open, and growth-oriented, it changes the energy in the room. You create permission for people to breathe, to be honest, to try things without fear of ridicule. And that kind of environment, whether in a classroom, a boardroom, or a living room, is where real growth happens. And all of that stems from how you talk to yourself. The words you whisper in private shape the way you show up in public. And if those words are rooted in growth, if they leave room for yet, you start to carry yourself like someone who can handle anything. Not because you have all the answers, but because you trust your ability to find them, to earn them, to build the skill set as you go. That's a deep kind of self-respect. Not flashy, not loud, but steady, solid, earned. And it becomes your anchor on the hard days, when you feel like nothing's working, when the progress is invisible. When comparison starts whispering lies, that's when you reach for yet. Not as a crutch, but as a compass. It brings you back, reorients you, reminds you that this is part of it. That feeling behind doesn't mean you're failing. It just means you're human, and that the path is still unfolding. You stop trying to sprint your way to self-worth. You stop performing growth and start practicing it. You stop pretending to be perfect and start getting curious about who you're becoming and who you're becoming. That person is not fragile. They don't crumble when things get hard. They adapt, they reflect, they stay open. They ask better questions, they take wiser actions. And slowly, over time, they become undeniable. Not because they arrived, but because they never stopped evolving. That's the thing people often miss. Evolution isn't loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. It shows up quietly in your tone, your choices, your consistency, in the way you carry tension without breaking, in the way you learn without clinging to ego, in the way you listen, adjust, and move forward again and again. And that quiet evolution is the real flex. Not the highlight reel, not the viral moments, but the quiet decision to keep becoming. That's what separates temporary motivation from lasting transformation. One is reactive. It shows up when things feel good. The other is proactive. It shows up because you made a decision to grow no matter what. And that decision gets easier every time you say yet. Because yet reminds you that you're not broken. You're becoming. That you're not behind. You're on your way. That you don't need to rush or compare or fake it. You just need to stay in it. To do the work, to take the next best step. That's where the magic is. Not in overnight success, but in overtime persistence. Not in explosive growth, but in steady compounding. The way muscles grow under resistance. The way character deepens in discomfort. The way clarity emerges from chaos. Not immediately, but inevitably, if you stay long enough to witness it. That's why people who master yet become unstoppable learners. They're not thrown by feedback. They seek it. They're not embarrassed by questions. They ask them. They're not ashamed of mistakes. They mine them for lessons. And that creates exponential growth, not just in skill, but in confidence, in leadership, in emotional intelligence. Because now, instead of avoiding failure, they're using it. They're studying it. They're letting it sharpen their thinking, strengthen their habits, and deepen their resilience. And that posture, the posture of a learner, makes them magnetic. Because learners become leaders. Not because they know everything, but because they model how to keep learning. They give others permission to be imperfect, to iterate, to try. And that kind of environment, it's contagious, it multiplies, it turns one person's mindset into a cultural ripple. One person's yet becomes a team's persistence, a classroom's courage, a community's resilience, all from a single word. And the beauty of it? You don't need a degree or a title or a platform to use it. You just need awareness, intentionality, a willingness to pause and rewrite the sentence. I can't do this becomes, I can't do this yet. And in that tiny rewrite, the door to possibility creaks open again. And possibility, once reawakened, starts to change everything. Because once you believe something is possible, your brain starts working differently. You shift from avoidance to engagement, from defensiveness to curiosity, from hesitation to action. The entire way you approach learning and life begins to recalibrate. You stop looking for proof that you're failing. You start looking for signs that you're improving. And even when the progress is slow, you know it's there. Because you've trained your mind to notice momentum, not perfection, not applause, just movement. That shift is subtle, but powerful. Because now, even small wins feel significant. Finishing the chapter, making the call, having the tough conversation, choosing the healthier meal, all of it counts, all of it matters. Because it's all part of the story you're telling and retelling every day. The story of someone who is still growing. And once that story becomes your identity, you become harder to shake. Setbacks don't define you. Criticism doesn't derail you. Fear doesn't freeze you. Because you're no longer trying to prove you're perfect, you're just proving you're committed. That you're not done learning, that you're not done evolving. That's not just a better way to perform, that's a better way to live. Because when you live from yet, you gain access to patience, to grace, to a kind of quiet faith that things will get better because you'll keep getting better. That the outcome you want is downstream of the process you're building. And as long as you stay in the process, progress is inevitable. It might not be linear, It might not be fast, but it's happening. And over time, that belief becomes a lens. You start seeing the yet in other people, in teammates who are still finding their voice, in partners who are still learning to communicate, in kids who are still discovering how the world works. You stop expecting finished products, and you start creating space for unfinished brilliance. That's how you become a force for growth in other people's lives. Not by telling them what to do, not by fixing their flaws, but by modeling what it looks like to keep becoming, to stay in the work, to honor the gap between where you are and where you're going, without shame, without rushing, without pretending. That kind of presence is rare and powerful. It makes you trustworthy. It makes you influential. Not because you have it all figured out, but because you're committed to the figuring. That's what real leadership looks like. That's what real influence feels like. It's not about having the answers. It's about living the questions consistently and out loud. And that consistency over time builds credibility. Not the kind of credibility that comes from a polished resume or curated social media feed, the kind that comes from lived experience, from showing up when it's hard, from leaning in when most people would lean out, from staying the course not because it's easy, but because it's aligned with who you're becoming, because that's what yet protects, your identity in progress. It reminds you that you're not locked into your current skill level, income, mindset, relationships, or fears. All of that is fluid. All of that is trainable. All of that is changing if you're willing to engage it. And most people don't realize just how much is changeable. They think they're stuck because they haven't experienced otherwise. But you've seen what happens when you add yet, when you try again, when you treat every mistake like feedback. When you stop attaching shame to being a beginner, you start to love being a beginner. Because beginners ask better questions, they take better notes, they listen more closely, they absorb more quickly. And in a world obsessed with knowing everything, being someone who's still learning is a superpower. It keeps you fresh, it keeps you adaptable, it keeps you connected to the real work, not just the outcome. And that work starts to feel meaningful, not because it's glamorous, not because it's public, but because it's yours, it's chosen, and it's infused with purpose, the purpose of growth, of evolution, of seeing how far you can take this version of yourself. That kind of purpose gives you stamina. It keeps you calm when others are panicking. It keeps you focused when others are distracted. It keeps you moving when others are stuck in self-doubt. Because you're not waiting for perfect clarity or perfect timing. You're moving forward, iterating, evolving. Because that's who you are. Not someone who waits to be ready, someone who becomes ready by doing. That identity shift from performer to practitioner changes everything. You're no longer trying to impress anyone, you're trying to improve. You're no longer living for applause, you're living for alignment, for the satisfaction of knowing that you're becoming a truer version of yourself. One choice, one challenge, one yet at a time. And when you live that way, something even more powerful happens. Your goals start to mature. They're no longer just about achievement, they're about alignment, about integrity, about becoming someone who doesn't just chase big things, but builds the capacity to hold them. Because here's the truth, success without growth is fragile. It can crumble under pressure, it can buckle under scrutiny, it can collapse when faced with real adversity. But when success is built on growth, on the daily practice of becoming better, braver, clearer, it lasts, it deepens, it scales with your character, not just your ambition, and yet is what keeps you growing at that depth. It keeps you honest, keeps you grounded, keeps you from mistaking speed for substance. Because when you're rooted in yet, you're not obsessed with being seen. You're committed to becoming solid. You're not chasing clout, you're chasing craft. You're not collecting wins, you're collecting wisdom. That mindset becomes a filter. It shapes the projects you say yes to, the relationships you invest in, the habits you build, the goals you pursue. Not everything that's shiny will tempt you. Not every opportunity will distract you. Because you're not just asking, will this make me look successful? You're asking, will this make me grow? That's a different question. And it leads to a different life. A life built not on quick wins, but on meaningful ones. Not on proving, but on becoming. Not on perfection, but on presence. The kind of presence that allows you to fully engage with the process, even when the outcome is uncertain. And that presence? It's magnetic. Because people crave realness. They crave leaders who are human, not polished. Who can admit mistakes, celebrate progress, and still hold vision. Leaders who live their yet, and in doing so, give others permission to live theirs. So don't underestimate what happens when you change your self-talk. When you interrupt the voice that says "I can't" with "I can't yet," that single pivot ripples outward into how you parent, how you lead, how you learn, how you love. It turns self-doubt into self-coaching, turns fear into fuel, turns setbacks into springboards, and over time it turns you into someone unrecognizable. Not because you've become someone else, but because you've finally become fully you. Fully you, not the version filtered through fear or edited for approval, but the version that's been tested, stretched, and refined through practice, through persistence, through patience. The version of you that understands growth is not just about getting better at things, it's about getting better at being yourself. And that takes courage. Courage to try again. Courage to not know. Courage to show up imperfectly and stay in the room. That's what yet gives you, not just the belief that things can change, but the bravery to stick around and see them change. Because let's be honest, the hardest part of any transformation isn't starting. It's staying. Showing up after the excitement fades. Doing the work when it's boring. Trusting the process when the results haven't caught up. That's where most people quit. Not at the beginning, but in the middle. And that's where yet becomes your secret weapon. It becomes the whisper in the silence that says, "You're not done." The echo that says, "This still matters." The push that says, "Keep going. It's working," even when you can't see it. Because growth is often invisible while it's happening. It hides in the reps you almost skipped, in the pages you finished when no one was watching, in the conversations you navigated more calmly, in the self-talk that got just a little more kind. That's growth. And if you blink, you'll miss it. But it's there, always. That's why staying matters, because the breakthroughs don't always come in big, dramatic moments. Sometimes they arrive quietly, disguised as discipline, as resilience, as trying one more time. And if you've trained your brain to expect growth, to believe in yet, you'll catch those moments, you'll recognize them, you'll build on them. And one day you'll look back and realize you don't even talk to yourself the same way. You don't doubt yourself by default. You don't spiral at setbacks. You don't freeze in the face of the unknown. You pause, you breathe, you say "not yet," and then you act anyway. That's the kind of change that lasts, because it's not built on willpower, it's built on identity, on story, on language. And when you change the language you use with yourself, you change the life you're creating around you. And that change, it starts with one word. And the beauty of that one word, yet, is that it's endlessly portable. You can carry it into any situation, any failure, any frustration. It fits inside your goals, your doubts, your learning curves, your relationships. It meets you wherever you are and invites you to see not the end, but the opening. Because yet isn't just a mindset. It's a posture. It's the tilt of your thoughts toward possibility. It's the willingness to see a wall and ask, "How might I climb this?" instead of "Why is this here?" It's the instinct to stay open, to options, to support, to another try, even when your pride wants to close off. That posture is powerful. It puts you in motion, and motion is everything. Because clarity doesn't come from standing still. Growth doesn't happen from watching. Mastery doesn't appear out of thin air. You move first, then you understand, then you refine, then you evolve. And yet keeps you moving when logic says stop. It tells your story differently. Where others might say "I failed," you say "I learned." Where others say "I'm stuck," you say "I'm building." Where others say "I can't," you say "I haven't yet." That change in narrative might seem small, but it's massive. Because you're not just adjusting what you believe, you're adjusting what you notice. And you'll start to notice progress everywhere. In your reactions, in your habits, in your focus, in your grit, and especially in your compassion for yourself and for others. Because when you internalize yet, you stop demanding perfection. You start creating space for failure, for re-entry, for breakthrough. That's the kind of space where real lives change. Not because you shouted louder or tried harder, but because you finally gave yourself the conditions to grow. You turned down the pressure, you turned up the process, and you stuck around long enough to see your own transformation. That's the invitation Yet is always offering. To not quit before the miracle, to not bail before the breakthrough, to not silence yourself before you've fully found your voice. Because your voice, your perspective, your gifts, your capacity, they're still forming, still unfolding, still deepening. And every time you say Yet, you choose to stay for it, to watch it happen, to co-create it, not with perfection, but with patience, with repetition, with love. That's what makes it real. Because real change isn't flashy. It doesn't always look like a transformation montage or a dramatic before and after. Sometimes real change, like getting out of bed on the day you wanted to disappear, like opening the book again when you still don't understand, like speaking up even when your voice shakes. It's subtle, it's unglamorous, but it's everything, and Yet helps you honor that. It helps you see those moments not as insignificant, but as sacred, as foundational, as the exact places where your character is being built, where your future self is quietly being formed, not in the spotlight, but in the repetition. Because greatness is built in the reps, the repetition of trying, of asking, of stretching, of believing in small shifts. That's what rewires the brain. That's what builds the habits. That's what turns the internal dial toward growth, slowly, almost imperceptibly, until one day you wake up and realize you respond differently now. You handle stress differently. You recover faster. You process emotions more clearly. You don't get paralyzed by imperfection. You've internalized progress as normal, not rare, not conditional, but expected. And all of that started with the way you spoke to yourself in moments that didn't feel powerful at all. Moments when you whispered Yet, and it's those whispers that echo the loudest over time. Because they accumulate, they shape your identity. They create this inner infrastructure of trust, not in the outcome, but in your ability to stay in the process. To keep showing up, and showing up becomes your superpower. You show up when it's awkward, when it's messy, when the feedback stings, when the fear creeps in. Because you're not waiting to feel fearless, you're acting anyway. You're no longer relying on motivation to carry you. You're anchored in something sturdier, the belief that growth is still possible here, even now, even for you, especially for you. Because you've seen what happens when you give yourself the chance to grow. You've seen the evidence. Maybe not in huge leaps, but in steady steps, in subtle confidence, in clearer direction, in deeper peace. And that evidence compounds. That's what Yet unlocks, compounding courage. Not the kind that rushes in once, the kind that drips in daily, that builds, that deepens. That holds you steady while the world spins fast. The kind that doesn't just move you forward, it transforms how you move, how you think, how you relate. And once you're anchored in that, nothing is wasted. Nothing is wasted. Not the failure, not the false start, not the season of doubt. Because once you adopt a Yet mindset, even your detours become data. Your missteps become maps. Your delays become lessons. It all counts. It all builds. It all becomes part of how you carry wisdom forward. And that shift, it's more than psychological. It's strategic. Because now you're not afraid of trying something new. You're not paralyzed by the idea of being bad at it. You're free. Free to learn, to experiment, to stretch into the next version of yourself. You're not fragile. You're flexible. You bend, but you don't break. And that makes you dangerous in the best way. Because you can't be easily discouraged. You're not undone by slow progress or external noise. You've built internal clarity, internal resolve, internal trust. That kind of self-trust changes how you lead, how you love, how you create. It makes your actions more intentional, your voice more grounded, your work more potent. Because you're no longer seeking validation, you're practicing transformation. You know that growth is often invisible on the surface, that it happens in the rewiring, in the reframing, in the way you speak to yourself when nobody's listening. And because of that, you treat every moment like training, every challenge like a set, every setback like resistance that will make you stronger if you push through it. This is what most people miss. They chase growth in performance, but ignore growth in mindset. They want results without rewiring. They want outcomes without identity shifts. But you've started with the foundation. You've chosen the slow, powerful route, the one that transforms you from the inside out. And now your outer life is starting to catch up. Your habits reflect it. Your discipline holds. Your curiosity increases. Your fear still shows up, but it doesn't get the final vote. And all of this entire shift, was sparked by a single word you chose to believe. One that told your brain, we're not finished, we're not fixed, we're not stuck, we're still moving, we're not there yet. And in that space between now and then, between limitation and possibility, you found something rare, something powerful, a way of seeing that turns obstacles into invitations, that rewrites I can't into I'm building, that reclaims the learning process as something beautiful, worthwhile, sacred. And in a noisy world obsessed with immediacy, that makes you a revolutionary. Because choosing yet in a world that wants now is radical. It means you're resisting the rush. You're rejecting the lie that if it doesn't come fast, it's not worth it. You're refusing the pressure to fake it just to look like you have it together. Instead, you're practicing patience. You're building something real. And real things take time. They take depth. They take presence. They take an uncomfortable amount of repetition. But when your goal is becoming, not impressing, that repetition doesn't feel like punishment. It feels like progress. It feels like purpose. It feels like proof that you're still in the game. And staying in the game is everything. Because most people stop too soon. They quit the new habit after a week, abandon the relationship after the first hard conversation, drop the dream when it doesn't get likes. But you're playing the long game. You know this isn't about overnight success. This is about lifelong alignment. That kind of vision clarifies everything. It quiets the comparison, it silences the noise, it recalibrates your pace, and it shifts your measure of success from being better than to being better than yesterday. That's what yet gives you. Permission to be unfinished, to be in motion, to be human. And being human is the point. Because it's not about becoming some ideal version of yourself who never doubts, never messes up, never feels afraid. It's about becoming someone who keeps going. Someone who feels all of that and still shows up, still learns, still grows, still adds yet. That's what makes you powerful, not the absence of weakness, but the presence of will. The will to keep trying, to keep reflecting, to keep choosing growth even when it's slow, even when it's painful, even when it feels like nothing's changing. Because deep down, you know something is. You can feel the shift, the stretch, the subtle reorganization of your thoughts and responses and beliefs. And over time, that becomes your new default. Not the critic, not the quitter, not the perfectionist, but the learner, the builder. The one who knows that the gap between where you are and where you want to be is not a verdict, it's a process. And the only way to close that gap is to stay in motion, stay in belief, stay in yet. And when yet becomes your anchor, failure no longer feels final. It feels formative. It becomes part of the blueprint, part of the rhythm. You begin to understand that setbacks aren't signs to stop. They're signals to adjust, to reassess, to realign, and then to keep going with more clarity than before. This is the quiet magic of a growth mindset. It doesn't make life easier. It makes you stronger. It doesn't remove obstacles. It changes how you face them. It doesn't guarantee success. It guarantees stamina. And that stamina, that refusal to opt out, is what eventually separates those who grow from those who quit. Because every meaningful change demands that you hang in longer than is comfortable, to sit in the tension between who you were and who you're becoming, to walk through the gap between skill and aspiration, between effort and excellence, and to not let that gap shrink your belief in what's possible. Instead, you let it shape your next step. You stop asking, how far do I still have to go? And start asking, what's one thing I can do today to move forward? That single step, taken over and over, compounds. It creates momentum. It rewires your identity. And before long, you don't just act like someone who's growing. You are that person. You become it through action, through repetition, through showing up with shaky confidence and leaving with earned trust. Trust in yourself. Trust in your process. Trust in the fact that you're not behind. You're building. And when you really internalize that truth, something incredible happens. You start extending that same grace to others. You see their not there yet moments as human, not broken. You cheer their effort instead of mocking their mistakes. You create space for people to grow around you, not because you're better, but because you remember how powerful that space has been for you. That's the ripple effect of yet. It starts as a whisper in your own mind and becomes a movement in your community, a culture of patience, of growth, of possibility. Not just for yourself, but for every person you influence, every team you lead, every family you love, every conversation you enter. Because when yet becomes your norm, you normalize becoming. And when you normalize becoming, you change everything. Not just what you achieve, but how you live. You become more curious, more resilient, more connected. Because when you give yourself permission to be in progress, you extend that permission outward. You build relationships rooted in understanding, not perfection. You build environments where people feel safe to grow, not pressured to perform. This is how cultures shift, one voice at a time. One conversation at a time, one not yet at a time. And it starts with you, right here, right now, choosing to believe that you are not behind, not broken, not limited to what you've been. You are unfolding, evolving, building capacity with every moment you stay in the process. Every time you hear the voice that says I can't, and you respond with not yet, you take your power back. You reclaim your potential. You disrupt the narrative that says ability is fixed, that success is predetermined, that your future is sealed. Because it's not. Your story is still being written. Your voice is still getting stronger. Your mind is still learning how to stretch without snapping, how to risk without retreating, how to trust without proof. And that's not weakness, that's growth. That's strength. That's the work. So keep going. Keep showing up with shaky hands and a stubborn heart. Keep writing the next sentence. Keep building the next habit. Keep saying yet like it's your North Star, because it is. It reminds you that your path isn't linear, but it is leading somewhere. That your work isn't perfect, but it is worth doing. That your pace isn't fast, but it is yours. You're not done. You're just not there yet. And that one word, that simple, quiet, radical word, might just be the difference between the life you settle for and the life you're still becoming.